Appreciate it. So I drive a Mazda B4000 pickup truck, and it's actually a Ford Ranger. I didn't know this. It's wearing different clothes. It says Ford Motor Company under the hood. And I drove it home. I was coming home late from school about a year ago, and I was hungry. It was cold. I was tired. I had basketball practice, and I was rushing. As I walked in the house, I looked at my wife and I said, I made a mistake. And she looked at me and she was like, what'd you do? And I said, well, I accidentally locked the keys in the truck. And she said, solve the problem. You see, at that time, we had a single-lane driveway, and I had parked behind her. And she had to get up early in the morning, and I thought a locksmith would be costly. So I did what any one of us would do. I Googled it. I Googled how to break into a Ford Ranger, and there was a whole series of videos on how to break into a Ford Ranger. Make, model, color. This one stuck out. This one stuck out because close to 70,000 people have also Googled how to break into a Ford Ranger. 16 people were not impressed with this video, but 139 loved it. The content creator in this video was so accurate and detailed that he told me I would be able to break into this truck in under 30 seconds. In a sense of irony, you use the truck to break into the truck. You see, you unscrew the radio antenna and you use the wide end at the bottom, and you lift up the handle, you insert it into the holes, and you wiggle it a little bit until pop, the lock will open. And I thought, okay, I gotta go out and try this. I'm a little competitive. So I grabbed my phone as a timer. I said, honey, I got this. And I went outside. Guess my first score. 42 seconds. I wasn't happy with that, so I locked my keys back in the truck and I went at it again. Took me about 3 tries, but I did both sides in under a minute. But what I really admire about this content creator, if you look at the description of the video, he warned me. You're gonna cuss while doing it, and I did. YouTube has taught me how to install laminate floors. YouTube has taught me how to install toilets. Just this week I fixed my washing machine because of YouTube. YouTube also helps me at home. You know the saying, we often don't know what we don't know? I thought I knew how to load the dishwasher. I really thought I knew. It turns out there is a proper way to load the dishwasher, and that's my next step, something I'm working on. I'm telling you this because I believe content consumption is dead. We consume content all day long, but what I mean is, do I really want my students to regurgitate information that's at my fingertips and tell it back to me? Is that something I want my students to do in this day and age? Am I assessing their ability to memorize content, or am I assessing their ability to understand content? I question myself when I'm giving assessment. If the question can be found via the internet, is it something rich enough? Or have we progressed as human beings so far that we can now solve problems that are a lot richer than just the knowledge-based questions? It's a maker movement. People are tinkering. We have 3D printers. We have coders. We have crowdfunding. People are building things all the time. So today I want to talk about how coding and other technologies gives my student voice. You see, we use the philosophy of coding in that it's okay to take a risk. And coding allows an opportunity for students to fail in a safe environment. An environment without fear, an environment without judgment. I first learned about computer code to solve an authentic problem from my uncle in 1999. He was a computer engineer for a mining company in North Bay, and his job was to make sure Y2K did not happen. So he sat there and he wrote lines of code, code after code after code after code. And his job was to make sure the clock didn't go over to 0000, but in fact went to the year 2000. So I said, what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do on New Year's Eve? And he said, I've got my laptop and I've got a case of beer. And he was going to sit there and he was going to watch and he was going to make sure his program ran through. When I was a kid, my brother and I used to go to Toronto via the train. I was 13. We would go from Windsor. My grandparents would pick us up in Toronto. My papa was a retired chemistry teacher. And I loved that he would give us the science experiments when we got there. We'd mix chemicals. He was a geologist, so we looked at rocks and minerals and microscopes. And I just loved it. We would spend an entire week in Toronto. We'd get there by ourselves. We'd spend an entire week over March break. So when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in the early 2000s, I was devastated. I was devastated because his ability to teach me orally would cease to exist the way I always knew it. I was devastated because our science lessons would change, our rocks and mineral lessons would change. But what I didn't realize is although he could no longer communicate with his words, he was still teaching me. I remember watching as if I was studying Alzheimer's at the zoo, and he was trying to remove the storm windows off of his sun porch, something he'd done every year for 30 years. Time to put the screens in. And he was struggling with a screw. Not only did he not have the right screwdriver, Alzheimer's told him to grab the wrong bit. But he didn't quit. And so for 15 minutes, I watched him mangle this screw. But for 15 minutes, I watched him solve the problem. I learned what determination was. I learned what perseverance was. He didn't have to use his words. But for the first time, he was teaching me never to give up. And that is a memory I will cherish. Thanks to Google, I can go visit his house, just like I did when I was 13 years old. Just like when I got off the train, because Google has created this content. So anytime, anywhere in the world, if I'm having a bad day and I need a little reassurance to never give up, I can go and stand and look at his front porch. In 1999, Sean Fanning and Sean Parker solved the problem. See, in those days, they couldn't afford to buy CDs for $25, so they created a little program that we heard earlier today called Napster. The problem with Napster is they're breaking, well, there weren't laws yet, but they were about to break all the laws that were put into place. So in 2001, Steve Jobs solved Napster's problem by making iTunes, where you could now purchase singles instead of full-length albums, but you still had the opportunity to purchase a full-length album if you wanted. In 2004, Mark Zuckerberg created Facebook so he could share content with his fellow students on campus. In 2007, Drew Houston created Dropbox because he was sick and tired of losing USB keys. In 2008, Noah Everett made TwitPic because at that time you couldn't put pictures on Twitter, and he wanted to. And within 2 years of his company, it had an estimated value of $10 million. In 2009, Brian Aspinall made a website called Twidgeducate because he wanted to teach how to use Twitter effectively in schools because I saw the value in it. But in 2009, Twitter was blocked at school. We knew all our kids were using it, but until we taught them how to use it appropriately, our IT was not going to unlock it. I want to talk about two profiles. So we have student A and we have student B, and this is quite common. Student A is really good at school. Student A loves the challenge of a test. Student A studies. Student A reads, student A memorizes, student A essentially plays school. Student A loves school because student A is good at school. Student B, on the other hand, student B is a little bit disengaged. Student B hasn't really been taught how to study or to memorize, and so student B doesn't really do well at school, and the traditional system has made student B feel that student B might perhaps be dumb. So student B lives in fear. Student B is afraid to go to school. Student B is afraid to write tests because it's not safe, because there is this judgment if I don't approve or develop or perform at the same rate as everybody else. And I want to shift the culture in my classroom from failure is bad to failure is good. For some reason, we don't necessarily celebrate failure in industry, but we encourage risk-taking and we encourage problem-solving, and we're not going to have students who are out-of-the-box thinkers if they're afraid. These are the skills employers want. Collaboration, critical thinking, determination, self-regulation, citizenship, computational thinking. That's a fairly new term. In 2007, computational thinking was defined by Jeanette Wing as combining the power of the computer to solve a problem. Critical thinking plus the power of the computer. So I would like to share with you how we use the philosophies of coding and technology and makerspaces at our classroom to develop problem solvers. Coding and other technologies allow students to take risks. Coding and other technologies allow students to solve problems. Coding and other technologies allow students to create content and not just consume content. Coding and other technologies allow students to collaborate and share and think critically and talk to each other and formulate different opinions. Here's an example. When I first started teaching, so Brian 1.0, I used to give textbook questions and worksheets like we all did. And so the questions back then would be, what are the factors of 20? List the factors of 30. List the factors of 40. List the factors of 50. And we would send it home for homework, of course, because we were mastering a skill. And it took me a few years to realize that student A would go home and student A would complete the homework in under 10 minutes flat and enjoy the rest of their evening, where student B probably wasn't completing that homework. And not necessarily because student B didn't want to, but probably because student B didn't know how, and student B didn't know where to turn because student B wasn't taught how to solve the problem. And so in those days, student B would come back to school with incomplete homework and then be punished for it. Student B would be kept in at recess. Student B would have to, stay after school, and we would call home. And essentially, we were ruining student B's evening because they were completely stressed out about it, and they were losing sleep over it, which just makes the cycle start again. So in this example, we changed the question from list the factors of 20 to how do you find the factors of 20? Because if you know how to find the factors of 20, then you know how to find the factors of 40, and you know how to find the factors of any other number that has factors. So this student, she wrote it down in English. She wrote a little procedure of how to find the factors of 20. So you have 20 and you start at 1. But then there becomes this conversation in class. Well, 1 is a factor of every number, so do we have to start there? Then you go to 2. And then you go to 3, and then you go to 4. And you repeat this process until you have found all of the factors of 20. And I thought, oh, that's great. I'm going to tell you what an algorithm is. It's a written procedure, but in computer words. An algorithm is a set of code that tells the computer how to solve a problem or complete a task. So we then took the written words and then just plunked it into computer words. And now we had a working product that was able to answer every textbook question I used to assign for homework. But this student extended it. You see, she actually found the factors of two numbers, because she wanted her application to tell me the greatest common factor, which was our next skill that we were looking at in math. She also extended this program a little bit more. If you enter the number 3 or 5 or 11 into her program, it'll tell you the number is prime because it counts how many factors there actually are. And I didn't ask her to do that. Here's another example. Traditionally, when teaching probability, I would have students flip coins. In grades 7 and 8, we have to explore experimental probability and theoretical probability. So in theory, flipping a coin is 50-50. It's either heads or it's tails. But when you experiment with that and you run the simulation once or twice or 3 times, it doesn't come out to be 50-50. So it's really difficult to teach the law of large numbers to 13-year-olds when you have loonies and quarters flying around the room. But essentially, traditionally, I would want them to flip it 3 times. And, it might be 100% heads or 33% heads or 66% heads. And I would say, okay, now go back and flip it 20 times. And I knew they weren't. They were pretending to flip it 20 times. And they're like, oh, yeah, whatever you say. We got 12 out of 20. And they were just picking numbers arbitrarily. But I didn't know how else to teach probability until these applications came out. So this student coded a simulator that flips a coin every time he touches the coin. And the program will determine what face or costume lands on the screen. And the program will then tally how many times the coin has flipped. And the program will tally how many times it has landed on heads. And the program will also tell you the experimental probability. So now instead of just filling out a T-chart, they're using principles of algebra, because those are variables. And they're using principles of geometry while they're learning about probability. So it's across strands of math. This student took his code and he put it into a loop. And so that turbo button is attached to a loop. And if you push the turbo button, the program will ask you, how many times would you like to flip this coin? And you can enter any number you want. So for fun one day, 10 o'clock in the morning, they said, let's put in 1,000,000. And I said, I'm game. I want to see if the computer can do it, and I want to see the experimental probability. So his program runs really, really, really fast in a really short period of time. So this piece of technology has allowed me to teach the law of large numbers rather effectively. It didn't make it to 1,000,000 by the end of that day. It only made it to 700,000. But they cared enough to come and look at every opportunity they could to see what it was at. And it got to about the 9th decimal place. They were both 50% decimal 0.00000, some other number at the end. I thought it was pretty cool. Coding and technologies allow for differentiated instruction. So if I want my students to add fractions, one student might create an application like this that adds 1/2 plus 1/4, where another student might develop an application like this that adds mixed numbers together. But at the end of the day, they both added fractions, and I'm totally okay with that. So coding and technologies allow for differentiated instruction and personal learning environments. We also use tools like Minecraft. Back in the fall, we were studying extending patterns. And so on paper, we've all seen this question. Here's figure 1, here's figure 2, here's figure 3. Now, what does 4, 5, and 6 look like? And I had a student say, well, that's pretty blocky. When I was like, yeah, you want to play Mario? And he was like, no, I think we should build this in Minecraft. And I thought, okay, let's totally do that. So all of a sudden, I have a classroom of grade 8 students who are having conversations about what the back end might look like. We're not just talking about extending the pattern this way, because we're bringing it to a third dimension. Now we're extending the pattern this way, because there's a whole canvas, spatial reasoning that they could come up with, and the conversations they were having with each other about what the back end of this pattern might look like. I also have students who use Minecraft to demonstrate learning in other areas. So in science, for example, we were studying the transfer of energy, kinetic and potential energy. And I had some students who chose to demonstrate this in Minecraft, and I was totally okay with that. So they created this world in Minecraft, this giant Rube Goldberg machine that cracked an egg. But what's cool about using Minecraft is it's not just science, because a Minecraft block is a cubic meter. So now we're having conversations about how big this structure might look like, and we're taking meter sticks and we're going outside and we're comparing it to the roof of the school. I want to shift the learning from what did I get to what will I learn. And I think until we remove fear, this will never happen. Student A wants to be told what to do, student A wants to be told how to do it, and student A will then go and do the job to get the grade. Student B wants to do what you want student B to do, but doesn't quite understand the steps, so student B isn't doing it, and at the end of the day, neither one of them are thinking outside the box or solving problems or thinking critically. I'm working on a website called Edmetal, and it's a positive reinforcement approach to soft skills. So in the Edmetal community, myself and my students can endorse each other when we see them, or myself, demonstrating resiliency, self-regulation, initiative, whatever. Teachers go on, they create an account, they add students in, and then they model it. So what happens is, I can collaborate with a colleague and talk about how well we are collaborating and introduce that vocabulary in hopes that the students recognize that, because they can go on and they can give me an endorsement for collaborating well. Because it's my belief that the students will emulate our behavior. And I want students really, really, really young to start using these terms. I want students at grade 2, grade 3 to start using words like determination, initiative, resiliency. So in the Edmetal platform, as a teacher, you create skills that you want to work on as a class. They could be skills that parents have input on. They could be skills you vote on as a group. They could be the Ontario Learning Skills, whatever you want. But in the platform, when students see somebody else demonstrating grit or put first things first, they can go on and they can award a medal to each other. I'm not saying gamification is a good thing. There's a lot of competition that comes with that. And as a teacher, it's my job to make sure that everybody is recognized for their strengths on any one of these skills at any given time. I think learning should be hands-on. I think learning should be authentic. I think we should bring Skype to our classroom. I think we should go outside and play. I think we should explore. Before I wrap up, I want to thank Google. I want to thank Google for creating content. I want to thank Google for archiving content in a space we can access at any time so we can solve richer problems based on the information that's there. I want to teach students not to take it at face value, but to make a judgment about it based on evidence from various websites. I want to thank Google for making it easier to teach geography, math brain. I want to thank Google for putting this content out there so I can visit Papa's house anytime, anywhere, all day long. I want to thank Google for adding the slider to Google Slides Street View, because I can go on today and I can look up Papa's house And I can go back to 2009, and I can pay him a visit because he was on the front steps when the Google truck went by. And that's just awesome. Thank you.